Hi, I am Ria N2RJ, and welcome to another edition of Ria's Shack Amateur Radio Stories Edition. Well, here we are on September the 11th, September 11th, 2020. But today we remember the events of September 11th, 2001. Something that stayed in my mind for a very long time. I initially came to the United States in the year 2000. And then about a year later, one September morning, I got up in my apartment on Roosevelt Island in New York City, in the borough of Manhattan. I turned on the TV to New York One News, and I saw where they were showing a picture of the World Trade Center with smoke coming out of it. I thought to myself, okay, what's going on? And then the graphics below said that a small plane had landed in the Trade Center. Well, I thought to myself, wow, okay, how could somebody make a mistake like that? They took a plane and they slammed straight into the World Trade Center. Where did they take off from anyway? Then eventually they said that, well, it was not a small plane, it looked like a commercial airliner. And a commercial airliner in the World Trade Center. And okay, somebody was having a bad day. Okay. Then we found out that this might have been deliberate. Well, then things got real. Okay. And I was thinking to myself, wow, why would somebody do this? Then I saw where they had the cameras on the Twin Towers and an airplane slammed into the second tower. Wow. Both of them got hit. Then they had reports of the Pentagon, because I knew what the Pentagon was, even though I've just been living here less than a year. I mean, who doesn't know what the Pentagon is? And then we heard of another plane coming down somewhere in some place in Pennsylvania. That was United Flight 93. And so we had 4 planes, 4 flights hijacked and resulting in tragedy. I saw the towers come down live. I saw it outside my window. I saw the smoke in the distance. I saw the FDR Drive. And I saw a lot of just pure chaos where people were running away from the smoke and of the building collapsing. Unbelievable, and all dust. So you might want to wonder, what does this have to do with amateur radio? Quite a lot, actually. It kind of put in my mind the need for amateur radio and its resilience in times of emergency. So at that time, the main mode of communication was the telephone. And a lot of the telephone switching, they had a lot of that in the World Trade Center. They also had where everybody was using the phones to call out of town. The cell phones were all jammed up. The landline phones you couldn't get through either. So you couldn't really make a phone call reliably in New York City. And it became to a point where you couldn't really have any sort of reliable communications. I mean, you had internet, but a lot of people didn't have internet at that time. People had dial-up maybe. And guess what you need for dial-up? You need the phone. So we were called into action. We had the group New York City Amateur Radio Emergency Service, New York City ARES. We were called in to man the shelters. Now, the good thing is that my involvement in amateur radio in New York City was with the emergency communications, where I took all the training with the Red Cross. I was primed and ready. I was really, with a good bunch of folks. We had Charlie N2NOV, we had John K2UN, and we had a bunch of people really seemed to be dedicated to emergency communications in New York City. So we deployed to shelters. We set up our radios. We got on the repeaters. We got and set up our backup simplex communications, and we got in the air and we passed our traffic. We relayed conditions at shelters. We It was really heartbreaking scenes inside the shelters. You saw people young and old. You saw the Wall Street bankers, and you saw the people who basically service the buildings, so to speak, from the Wall Street bankers. So you had the poor and the rich. They were there together in the shelters, and they couldn't get back into their apartments because it was coated in dust, or they were just not able to get in because it was closed off due to police closing off the lower Manhattan. It was surreal. But we provided this valuable service. And after that, for nights on end, I did net control where we had nets passing traffic, and we had a bunch of shelter operations, and it was pretty good. So, one thing you might not realize, a lot of people who are involved in disaster and emergency communications think of a large scale disaster such as a hurricane, a wildfire, or they think of something that, it's a natural event. But here in over a widespread area, here you have an urban event, man-made, if you could call these people human, who where you had failure of communications and an actual communications emergency, and you were called into action. There are several things you need to understand about how the a typical emergency activation in New York City would differ from something out, say, in Florida, where you have hurricanes. Because New York City is very densely populated and urban. It's pretty much unlike most parts of the United States. I think it's unlike any other part of the United States, to be honest. So, New York City radio amateurs, we have this special skill that we cultivate. We cultivated because I was a New York City radio amateur, where we learn to make communications primarily with portable and makeshift operations. We're not reliant upon the antennas installed in our house. We're not reliant upon the radios in our vehicles. Well, some of us. A lot of us didn't even have driver licenses. So we didn't even have vehicles. You rely upon the ability to take your portable radios, your portable battery, your portable antennas, and go down and set up and do your thing. I know what? It worked really well. I had an ICOM 706 because I had the dream to get on HF. I bought that from Barry Electronics in New York. Who remembers Barry Electronics? I don't know if they're still around. But ICOM 706, and for me, the main feature was that it had 100 watts on 2 meters. So I took that and I hooked it up to an external mag mount antenna, and I tuned it down to like 50 watts, and I was good to go with that. I had a handheld Yaesu VX5 that I used, and that was good to go too. I could talk on the local repeaters. I could even talk simplex if I wanted to. And one ham jokingly said, hey, if you need to call Red Cross headquarters in Virginia, you could do that too. Put a wire up and you do that. So that was good. Look, I'm not the biggest, how should I put it? I am not the biggest emergency communicator out there. I did my time in EMCOM. I think EMCOM has its purpose in amateur radio. I do think that amateur radio is more than EMCOM. I'll be totally honest when I tell you that emergency communications in amateur radio is not the only thing you do in amateur radio. However, it is a big reason why we get to keep our frequencies, and it is a big reason why we do what we do. At the same time, I do think that you need to be able to be prepared. And you do this by engaging in your normal amateur radio practice. So for me, this involved months on end of not emergency drills, but public service events where we went to the bike-a-thons, we went to the walk-a-thons, we went and we basically practiced to use our radios, to set up our portable radios, to set up portable battery-powered, emergency-powered operations. And that trained us for a Black Swan event like 9/11, where the phones, because it was primarily landline phones then, the phones went down, the cell phones were jammed, and nobody could talk to each other except us. And that, my friends, is how 9/11 went down. One final thought: we've lost a lot of people during 9/11. I would like to remember and have a moment of silence for the police officers, firefighters, and emergency personnel, and also those who worked in the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and those who may have been on Flight 93, including broadcast engineers who were up at the top of the Twin Towers in doing maintenance work. Moment of silence. That's all I gotta say for now.